Omega has consistently been in the top 3 of the most successful revenue-generating Swiss watchmakers for more than a decade. Omega is, behind Rolex, probably the most recognizable luxury mass-produced watch brand in the world. They have the James Bond franchise. They have iconic watches like the Speedmaster Moonwatch, and when Swatch needed to be saved from oblivion, the solution was to make a plastic Speedy. On so many metrics, Omega seems to be a success. But you wouldn't know it. Because people, and by people I mean enthusiasts, they complain about Omega for all sorts of reasons. The list of criticisms is seemingly endless. Too many options, unfocused catalog, weird pricing, too thick watches, bad bracelets, lackluster interpretations, helium escape valves, over-reliance on some core watches, not just weird pricing but also escalating pricing. The list goes on and on and on. For a seemingly successful, dominant brand, the consensus seems to be that Omega is a bit of a mess. And I tend to agree. Let's dive in. Let's just start with why people like Omega. It comes down to a couple of things. For enthusiasts and collectors, Omega have for the longest time been associated with historically important designs and a very good cost to value ratio. You simply used to get a lot for your money with Omega. And they were, to a lot of people, a competitor in quality to Rolex at a lower price. For the regular watch buyer, Omega is also popular. And again, it has usually come down to having a really strong price to value ratio. Metas, comparable quality to Rolex, or at least by many perceived that way, and brand cachet in its own right. So basically good watches at relatively good prices, and just like Jeff Johnson, it's the name you know. And those good watches have generally been positioned as mass market luxury options for the average buyer. They are aimed at the big demographic of people that want a good luxury watch. They aren't a niche brand that make niche designs for people with niche tastes. They have a diver in the Seamaster 300M or the Planet Ocean that is for the generic, average, middle-of-the-road customer. These watches compete in looks and feature set with other average generic divers like the Submariner, the Black Bay 41, or the Super Ocean Heritage. They have the Aquaterra, which is your middle-of-the-road sports watch. It competes with the IWC Mark 20, the Breitling Top Time B31, the Rolex Oyster Perpetual, or a Datejust. Then they have the Speedmaster, which is their flagship chronograph. Omega have nice dress watches. They have some nice ladies' watches. They have all those models in popular dial colors, and they have upgrades in the form of two-tone and gold and gem set and specialty materials. And on top of that, they actually do more than Rolex, because Rolex almost exclusively caters to the middle-of-the-road luxury buyer. There aren't any quirky Rolexes anymore. There are variants, but they are all for the average customer. Omega, though, the Ploprof, a 54mm brick of a die watch with a super distinctive design, is not for your average watch buyer. The Omega Dark Side of the Moon. It's a big, chunky chronograph in colored ceramics, meteorite dials, and rockets for hands. And they are not John Q average public watches. And they also made a 45mm, $600,000 high complication chronograph chiming mechanism watch. And they made a ultra high tech movement and high-tech material Aquaterra with a recessed push-in crown for her guy who likes to jump over bars with a pole. Some are for enthusiasts, like the Speedy 321, but the Dark Side of the Moon watches are for a very different buyer from the 321 buyer. The person that goes for Ploprof is never going to be the person that falls for the chiming gold chronograph. The fact is, if there's one brand that does its best to have a watch for literally every taste, then it's Omega. The average customer, the movement enthusiast, the heritage enthusiast, the actual saturation diver, you name the demographic, Omega probably caters to them. Which brings us to why we complain. Problem number one, thickness. Okay, it's more than thickness, it's also proportions and other factors. But thickness is emblematic of a consistent problem for a lot of Omega models. Ask an enthusiast about the classic Planet Ocean, not the new one that just got released, and they'll say Omega watches are too thick. An Aquaterra is 13.4mm thick. Its competitor, the Datejust, is under 12mm. 13.4 isn't terrible, but in a space where people want an all-rounder watch that fits under a cuff, 13.4mm is inferior. The Planet Ocean was over 14mm. The Ploprof is around 3 feet thick. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe if you haven't already done so. On this channel, I talk about watches, everything I love about watches, and all things watch market related. I am unbiased, I'm in nobody's pocket, and I just love talking about watches. Hopefully you will listen to my channel and subscribe. Thanks. Next problem, and this is a controversial one. In some respects, their movement technology isn't entirely competitive. Now, hold on, hands off the keyboard, don't touch the keyboard. Let me explain. First of all, from a mass market perspective, most, including myself, would agree that the Omega Master coaxial movements are the best out there. They are super accurate, they are super robust. The escapement, the dual barrel construction just make for something that is both robust and precise over time. But they don't have the perceived edge anymore. Tudor has METAS. Doesn't matter if the movement might not be as good, it's METAS. And does Omega have a hyper-precise mass-produced 5 Hz movement? No. Do they have 70, 80, 90, 100 hours of power reserve? No. 5 Hz and 100 hours isn't practically important, but to the mass market consumer, some features sell better than others. It's like the megapixel race of camera sensors. For most consumers, there's very little real-world benefit to more pixels, but it is the number that people chase. And here Omega is perceived to being falling behind. Their bracelets have also been a mixed bag at best for a very long time. The problems include a Seamaster 300M bracelet that was very 90s in its design. It was big and chunky and not refined in a 2025 sense. Or 2026, actually, we're in 2026 now. Anyway, they've tried with a mesh bracelet as well, which to start with is a very acquired taste, but it also has the thickest clasp on the planet. And, back to the Aquaterra bracelet, Omega haven't consistently been able to hit the right balance of polish to matteness ratio. They're just not visually balanced. And, the case in point, I just had hands-on with the new Planet Ocean the other day, and the bracelet clasp is uncomfortably sharp on the edges. There are just so many niggles with some stuff like that. Then, for every real fabulous watch in the catalog, I think you can find a model which makes you go, huh? Some are bad, others are just baffling. The Aquaterra, good sports watch. To many, the new Railmaster isn't a Railmaster, and it's just a bad substitute for a Rolex Explorer. The Omega Mars Timer is cool in a Big Bang Theory kind of way, but why does it exist? And the Planet Ocean World Timer in ceramic? Why? Why do we need it? And then there's the Speedmaster, Dark Side of the Moon, where a lot of people had the question, why did they use a rocket as a hand? Rolex critics will say that Rolex are boring beyond all belief. They will release the same model with minor variations again and again and again. Omega don't have that problem. Their problem is more associated with the releases that are very hit or miss. If we're going to add one more criticism, Omega is one of the brands that feels to many like they have creeped too far up in terms of price. They used to offer watches at a very reasonable price and were deemed a sort of value offering. That's not the case anymore. I did a little back of an envelope math thing on the retail price of all Omegas I ever owned, and their retail price today and over a 10-year period, prices from Omega have gone up on, an average of 7-8% per year. Rolex for the same period, as comparison on my watches, tops out at 5%. JLC was even worse. But there's no doubt in my mind that specifically Omega have creeped up towards a more luxury buyer and have moved away from that original value space. The question I ask myself is, why has this happened? And a lot of these problems can be traced back to their lineup. And I'm going to ask you a question. Explain the lineup of Omega to me in a simple, understandable way. I promise you, it's not that easy. I've talked about Rolex before, but for those of you for whom this is your first video with me, Rolex has a continuum from a dressy watch, which starts at the 1908, then watches on Jubilee bracelets to polished center link oyster watches with, the most two-disc watches with satinized bracelets. And at the end, you've got no ceramic. You've got, essentially the Rolex Explorer 2. On the vertical, they have the same watch, but more gold. So you go from steel to two-tone to gold on a bracelet to full gold. Above that, platinum, diamonds, specialty items. It's easy. For mass market consumer brands, this kind of simple segmentation is important for a whole lot of reasons. And Omega doesn't, because their catalog is a mess. Technically, they might have fewer SKUs than Rolex, but the breadth and variety of their catalog far surpasses that of Rolex. I can't for the life of me explain the positioning of their lineup. Is the Aquaterra their middle-of-the-road sports watch? I think so, but then who's the Globemaster for? What about the Aquaterra Small Seconds? Is that an alternative to a regular Aquaterra, or is it an upgrade? Now, the Omega Speedmaster has the enthusiast Hesalite version, but then, like Rolex, there are 2 steel models. From there, you can get two-tone options, gold options, and specialty options. It's a clear upgrade path, just like Rolex. But then tell me, what's the point of the Speedy 57 relative to the Moonwatch? Is it an upgrade or an alternative? And the 2 counter models, what are they relative to the 57? An upgrade or an alternative? All of this boils down to 2 things that I think Omega get wrong pretty consistently. First, I think they always ask themselves before the release of any watch, will somebody buy it? And if the answer is yes, Omega will build it. Second, their ideas are all ones that feel like they came out of a team building workshop. You know, one of those with post-it notes and whiteboards and flip charts, and you've got a facilitator that says, just write any idea. No product is too crazy. And then Omega went and built every single watch on those post-it notes, including watches that the geeky intern from the mailroom suggested. The problem for me is it doesn't feel like the question, will someone buy it, is the right question to ask. At least not in isolation. The question I think Omega have consistently failed to ask, in addition, is will it sell a significant amount of watches? And will it cannibalize customers from other similar products? The Speedmaster 2-counter models probably sell, but do they sell a lot? Basing it off of secondary market discounts, my guess is no. And if they had not existed, would a customer just have bought a Speedy 57 instead? Probably. And that workshop post-it note exercise is what led to a white Speedmaster. Fabulous, genius even, but it also led to a regatta timer that is at best pointless. And for Bond, they just take a Seamaster 300M and change the dial and case back engraving. But for the Olympics, they build a whole different watch. Why? To me, it boils down to two things that Omega have been unable to reconcile. In their search for growth, they have expanded their catalog in the hope of speaking to every possible customer. Variety seems to have been the answer. Rolex basically limits variety to dial variants. That goes for the Datejust, the Daytona, the GMT. But Omega has an absurd number of chronograph variants that just aren't dial differences. I've spoken about this heat map analogy a couple of times now. There's this hot center where you have an average, middle-of-the-road generic customer. This is the customer that just wants a good watch. They walk into a store, they've done relatively little research, they know of a brand that they've heard of, they know it's good, and they want a sports watch. If they know Rolex, they will ask for the one with the shiny bezel, and that's the Datejust for you and me. If they know Omega and want a chronograph, they'll ask for the watch that they saw at the Swatch store. That's your middle-of-the-road customer, the C-class buyer, the Hugo Boss suit buyer. It's the predictable watch option buyer. The middle-of-the-road customer walking into Omega doesn't need a Dark Side of the Moon, a 2-counter model, or a Seamaster 300M chrono. They would be perfectly fine with the Speedmaster with some dial variants. The middle-of-the-road customer doesn't need a small seconds Aquaterra. Then there are the customers that are outside of that center of that heat map. There's a niche customer that wants a Ploprof. There's a niche customer that wants a Dark Side of the Moon watch. The Ploprof customer and the Dark Side of the Moon watch customers are not the same customer. Go through the catalog and you'll see how many niches Omega caters to. It's staggering and it's wonderful for people that want options. But what company at this size has options for every single niche audience on the planet? But for a company of this size, trying to be everything to everybody is just the wrong option. Diversification through unchecked variety leads to an unfocused product lineup and unclear brand positioning and products that collect dust on the shelves. Also, I'd guess that Omega's calculation that these options cost them fairly little in terms of production complexity is a wrong calculation. I think some people are going to be thinking, Mike, who cares if their lineup is a mess if it means that we as consumers have tons of options as a consequence? We get 300Ms and Planet Oceans and 300s and CK2998s and all sorts of variants. And that's a fair point. If it were just something that meant Omega made a little bit less profit, then I wouldn't care. But pretty much any brand within any sector that gets too far away from their core customer and gets too far into the variety race ends up doing things badly. Quality suffers because instead of having someone taking a look at making a stellar bracelet for Seamaster 300M, you instead have someone faffing about with a limited release Olympic timekeeping commemorative edition watch. Instead of having someone work on the 13.4 millimeter thickness of an Aquaterra, they have someone working on an America's Cup Seamaster Regatta. Omega don't have unlimited resources. And when there is so much product variety, so much product diversity, things like thinner cases, longer power reserve, better bracelets are just one more thing on the backlog that they don't get around to. And when they do, which they did on the new Planet Ocean, I wonder if they missed the fact that the underside of the clasp is far too sharp, that the bezel has a little bit of play to it that it shouldn't have, and the plots on the black Planet Ocean aren't white like the ones on the blue Planet Ocean, which makes the dial pop so much less. It also hurts consistency of design language. Twisted lugs, straight lugs, Planet Ocean beveled lugs are again great for variety, and I'm not arguing that Omega should go the route of Rolex and only go with the oyster case logic. But again, Omega just comes off as visually inconsistent. I think it's one of the reasons that Omegas aren't always as instantly recognizable as Rolexes or APs are. There's just so much more variance. Nobody can do everything all the time, and I do believe this chasing of variety and options regularly impacts important key features of good watches: bracelets, clasps, finishing. I'm also fairly confident, at least in part, that it contributes to the inconsistency of their releases. Now, I don't want Omega to stop making enthusiast watches. I think, contrary to what Rolex do, Omega should embrace enthusiasts more openly. I think there is space for specialty items, but I do think Omega could be stronger if they had a clearer starter lineup. DeVille as the rest watch, Constellation as the integrated, Aquaterra as the sports watch, Speedy as the chrono, maybe two kinds of chrono. The Speedy is the all-round and the 57 can be the luxury or the premium model. 300M is the all-round value diver and the Planet Ocean is the luxury desk diver. And then maybe a better Rail Master as the tool watch. All watches should have a materials upgrade path, so two-tone gold, specialty items, etc. And then I'd kill the 300M chronograph. I'd kill the Aquaterra small seconds, the two counter models, at least for a time. I would kill the Globemaster for a period of time. Olympic models, gone. But then the difference for me would be to rotate the enthusiast models and make them limited in time, but not in availability. So instead of having very, very few Snoopies available for years and years, rather have a lot of Snoopies available for a shorter period of time. But never make them part of the core recurring collection. They rotate in and out and function as enthusiast pieces, as pieces that highlight Omega's history and also as testing grounds for new innovations, including movements and complications. All this, I think, would help the core collection be stronger and more robust. More time can go to refinement and product improvement while also allowing the specialty items room to breathe and grab the limelight. This wouldn't make Omega like Rolex. That's something people were talking about 10, 15 years ago. The point would be to be that mass market brand with the enthusiast edge. That's what I think would make Omega better than they are right now. They would be more consistent, they would be more focused. Mass market, but with an enthusiast twist. Those were my thoughts. Share yours in the comments. Like, subscribe. Cheers.